thousands of worlds in this small, small area around us. And we have just started to scratch the surface of what's out there.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to the ÖAW-ISTA Lecture. So the ÖAW-ISTA Lecture, we were both, Martin and I, were newcomers to our institution. So I'm the vice president and I'm serving in this function for 3 years. We have 3 ÖAW-ISTA lectures I've had the pleasure to attend or host so far. And we both think that it was a sign of friendship between the two biggest non-university-based research institutions in Austria. There's lots of things we have in common, our institutes, some that are complementary. So things we have in common is the interest in science and the dedication to excellence, curiosity-driven research, fundamental research. Things that are complementary is maybe our age. So I think ISTA is order of magnitude 15 years old and the ÖAW is orders of magnitude 1 order of magnitude older, right? Order of magnitude is the theme, I think, also of today's lecture. So it was founded in 1847. It's a learned society. It has 700 members in Austria and abroad. It covers virtually all areas of research. The Austrian Academy of Sciences also conducts research, so it hosts 26 research institutes. So there's excellent research done here. There's also, I think, excellent research done at the ÖAW. But maybe a difference, complementarity is that here it's mainly based on natural sciences, math, computer science. That's also covered at ÖAW, but ÖAW is much broader, so it's also social sciences, humanities, preservation and interpretation of cultural heritage. I think what combines both institutes is that we are dedicated to fostering young research talent. The Austrian Academy of Sciences, in addition to hosting and conducting research by young postdocs and PhD students, also gives out scholarships and prizes. So for the young people here, maybe you want to check out the ÖAW web pages, maybe there's something for you. So this lecture series, there has been 9 lectures so far, and there is ones that I have attended were really fabulous people speaking. So the first one I attended was by Jan LeCun. He was he's one of the fathers of artificial intelligence. And I remember during dinner, he showed us ChatGPT, which was, no one had thought about it that time. He already had the first version. And then the last lecture was hosted by the ÖAW, and we were particularly lucky because we invited Anne Villiers, who shortly before her lecture got the Nobel Prize. So you can see we have a really wonderful lineup, and we very much look forward to today's lecture, and I'm very much look forward to hearing what you have to say, Lisa. Thank you. And I think, now, before...
So we have a very motivated speaker who jumped out. Lisa, just give me a few minutes, okay? So my name is Martin Hetzer. I'm president of the Institute of Science and Technology Austria. Thank you, Ulrike, for your introductory words. When I joined also 3 years ago, this institution, we were 75 research groups. We're currently 95, and we're growing to 150 in the next 10 years to 2036. And astronomy is actually a fairly new field for us, only a few years, and we recruited 5 outstanding astrophysicists. I see a few here. Anyway, so it's still an emerging, but those 5 have primed us as a community already to be very, very excited about this latest advances in astronomy. And so we're really ready for your presentation. Now, Lisa Kaltenegger will address probably one of the oldest and one of the most profound questions that humans have been asking, are still asking, and keep asking, I think at a higher rate now, is, are we alone in the universe? And I think what you will address is that so far when we thought about what could life look at other planets, is it similar to Earth, we always thought it's like our planet Earth, but with telescopes reaching farther and farther into deep space and also instruments with higher resolution, we realize, well, planets, and I think that's what your first slide is. I'm giving you a talk, by the way. That the planets that are being discovered at a really rapid pace might be very different from our planet. They might be much bigger, like big Earths with thick atmospheres. They might also have much smaller suns in their center, and we're exposed to red light versus yellow light. And all those has dramatic implications for what life would look like. And Lisa is addressing those. Lisa is from Salzburg, but she did her PhD in Graz, University of Graz. And from her diploma thesis already, I see that she was already interested in extrasolar planet search and also in the formation of planets and detection methods. So I think you will cover both probably, this exciting new technology that allows us to actually look and hunt. And I love the title of your book, Alien Earth, which is available outside, also later for signature. The new science of hunting, of planet hunting in the cosmos. What a cool title. And Lisa is currently, she's coming from Cornell, where she joined as associate professor in 2014. But in 2015, she became founding director of the Carl Sagan Institute. And for her book, which she published last year, she won, congratulations, the Carl Sagan Medal for Science Communication. So also, she's not only a great scientist, but also an excellent, it seems, we'll see, science communicator. So the pressure is on, and a warm welcome to Lisa Kaltenegger.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. It is my pleasure to be here and tell you a little bit about this really fascinating time we all get to live in. Because if you think back, this question, whether we are alone or not, has been around for thousands of years, even written down about thousands of years ago. But we never had the technology to do more than guess whether or not we are alone. And what has changed is that we now know that there are thousands of planets around other stars. And for the first time, we have a telescope big enough, the James Webb Space Telescope, to actually look at some of those, to figure out if we can find signatures in the air of those planets that we cannot explain with anything else but life. So that's the premises of the amazing time we find ourselves living in. And we haven't found life in the universe yet, I'm sorry to say, so the Nobel Prize will have to wait. I'm sorry, even so I appreciate the confidence. But we are starting to identify what the signatures would be and how we'd get there. And what you just heard is that I have this interest light and you see the Earth, but you see other planets that look a little bit like the Earth, but they have different colors. And this is just my artistic capability. I used the Earth, I rotated it by 45 degrees, and then I recolored it. But what I like about it is just basically brings back this idea that even when we're looking for other Earth, those don't have to be exactly the same as our Earth is right now, because our Earth has changed through its lifetime a lot. Think about the time of the dinosaurs, think about when the Earth was really young. And so I'll put all these puzzle pieces together with what we found to show you what we're going to do next. And so first, in case you want a bit more information, I wrote this review in 2017. That's basically how to do this now with the James Webb, but with any telescopes and what the issues are. It's free online. If you can't find it, let me know. I'll send you a link. Or if you want it in a little bit more accessible way, this is the book I wrote, so Alien Earth. See the hopeful S at the end? So we have thousands of new worlds that we found so far. And so now the race is on to figure out if any of them could be like ours. But let me orient you first. So we have our galaxy, the Milky Way. It's about 100,000 light years across. And these 6,000 worlds that I'm going to talk to you about today are in our neighborhood in about 100 to 1,000 light years radius. Why? Because if you have a torchlight and I stand close to you, it's a lot brighter than if I stand very far away from you. And if I want to analyze the light from these planets and their stars, the closer, the better. So thousands of worlds in this small, small area around us. And we have just started to scratch the surface of what's out there. Why is this so hard, right? Let me show you a picture. This is in size comparison, the size of the Earth, you are here, to the size of our sun. You actually not here because that would be really bad, because that would be really, really hot, right? But I just wanted to have this in comparison because even a small flare on the solar surface can be 10 times as big as the Earth. And so keep that in mind to after when I say that all signals of these planets we get are modulated by how the star behaves. And stars are not boring things. They're actually quite active, they change the light. And so it takes us a bit of time, even with the James Webb Space Telescope, to get the signals from the atmosphere of these tiny planets. And another thing, so this is the comparison of the size. So if you put the Earth 100 times next to each other, that's the diameter of the sun. But we don't want to just find the Earth. We've been doing that. We have 6,000 planets already that we know of. Now we want to look at the atmosphere. And so if you shrink our Earth to the size of an apple, our atmosphere is thinner than the peel of that apple. And that's where the signals are that we're trying to spot. So, how do we find planets in the first place? First, you can find planets usually only because you look at their star. The stars are bright, but if a planet goes around a star, the gravity of the planet also tugs on the star. So the star and the planet move around the center of the mass of the system. So you don't see the planet because it's small and it's not very bright, but you see that the star wobbles. And then you can ask yourself, what can make the star wobble? And it has to be a second object if it's something that happens over and over again. And you can figure out how massive that object is that pulls. So if you have a big planet, the star moves a lot. If you have a small planet, the star wobbles a little. So it's much easier to find massive planets, big ones, than the small ones. Keep that in mind. The second method, that's the methods where we mostly find all of our planets, is called the transit method. We look at the star, and then the planet by chance blocks our view from the hot stellar surface. This is the brightness of the star. Planet goes between us and the star. You see the brightness dips. And you can find more than one planet that way because now the second planet comes and you get a second dip with a different depth. And here you happen to have two planets at the same time. But again, from the shape of your light curve, you figure out which planet it is. And you can figure out how long each individual planet needs to go around the star. And with Kepler's laws, you can then figure out how far away your planet is from the star and how hot it is, roughly. So when you have all of this, this is just an artist's impression about the diversity of objects that you find. And so up here is our solar system for comparison with the four innermost small rocky planet, just compares in size where those planets are. So the first thing that jumps out here is to say, oh, but all these other planets are much closer to their star. Why? Well, they are much easier to find because you don't have to look that long to see the star wobble back and forth. And you don't have to look that long to find the dip in the light curve. So in everything I'm showing you today, and here you see how diverse this is, big planets on the inside, big planets on the outside, and this is just a fraction of the incredible diversity that we have found out there. But if I take this together, and so I said this wobble method where I basically look at the planet because the star moves back and forth. I don't see the planet, I just see its effect on the star. And then by chance, if the star goes in front of, the planet goes in front of the star, the brightness dip tells you how big this planet is, how much of the surface it blocks. Here, you get the mass. Here, you get the radius. If you find the planet with both methods, you got a density. And then you can say, well, this planet is a rock, like the Earth, or this planet is a gas ball, like Jupiter. But when you now plot how many planets there are and how big they are, this is size. So 11 is about the size of Jupiter, so you're looking at a puffy planet, and 1 is the size of our Earth. And this is how many there are. Don't worry about the number specifically, but you see that there are many, many more planets that are small out there, and like potentially rocks like the Earth out here. Then there are big planets. And that is really exciting for somebody who wants to find life, because if all the planets out there were big Jupiters, it's probably going to be harder to argue that in the gas masses of Jupiter, you can somehow create a cell with DNA and RNA. But on rocky surfaces, on planets with rocky surfaces that have liquid water on top, we think that the different carbon atoms can actually stick to each other, form long chains, and form a prebiotic cell structure. I'm more than happy to talk about this more later, but that's how we think that rocky planets with a liquid is our best chance to find life somewhere else too, or to create life somewhere else too. So I said we have 6,000 confirmed planets around other star, but we have 10,000 more that we actually have just not vetted yet. You always have to look at, did the detector do something funny? Is the signal real? It takes time. And so whenever I have a PhD student starting, I'm like, how many thousand planets would you like to work on? So in case you have extra time, there are several thousand of candidates that can use help. And NASA actually has an outreach program, citizen science project, that everyone can work on. You don't have to be American. You don't have to be a scientist, where you can help them find planets. You can just Google it. So planets, they are very different, the small ones and the big ones. And here I'm just showing you one of the latest images of Jupiter. And here in comparison is the Earth, size comparison. So when you see this image, all these beautiful structures that you see on Jupiter are actually weather patterns. There are storms, there are tornadoes, there are gas layers upon gas layers. If you were to step on Jupiter, you would sink. It's just gas. You're not encountering a solid surface until the pressure is so high that you solidify too. And anything you would like to breathe solidifies too. So completely different kinds of planets. Why am I showing you this? Another thing that I wanted to show you. So this is our Earth. And you might have heard about Jupiter's red spot, this big tornado on Jupiter. You can actually throw our whole Earth in and you would have room to spare. So there's a weather system on Jupiter that's bigger than our whole planet. Just to get a feeling how diverse planets are. And so now, I told you that we have the Earth and Jupiter and that they're very different. But I also wanted to show you this because Jupiter is the biggest gas planet, actually the biggest planet in our solar system, and the Earth is the biggest rocky planet in our solar system. So now you go and you want to say, okay, we found new planets, what do we expect? Well, we expected planets all the way up to the size of the Earth as rocks. And then we expected planets between Neptune and Jupiter as gas planets. That's what we thought we'd find. And this is what we did find. So what you see here is the radius in Earth's radii. Remember I said 1 is the Earth's radius, right? And so this is the biggest rocky planet in our solar system. And the next sized planet in our solar system is Neptune. So we were expecting things between Neptune and Jupiter and below the Earth's radius. And if you just look at the dots, the first thing that jumps out is that actually in other planetary systems, the most amount of planets we've found so far are planets we don't have in our solar system. They're in size between the Earth and Neptune. So we call them super Earth or mini Neptune. And now, of course, the question is on, are super Earths really better than Earth? And so we don't know that yet, but there's a huge diversity of planets out there that we're learning to understand that we never knew existed because they don't exist in our solar system. But again, remember that it's much easier to find the smaller planets closer, or the bigger planets, but also the ones closer to the star. So we have a bias in what we can find. We cannot find our solar system yet. We haven't had enough time because Jupiter takes about 11 years to go around the star. So with the transit, you want to see the planet once. Then you want to see the second time to know how long it takes to go around the star. And then you'd really like to see the third time to know that you were right. And so that would be for Jupiter alone, the closest gas giant, 33 years. Go further out and you go over 100 years of observations. And I don't know why, but NASA is not very keen on giving you observing time for 100 years to find something that you don't know if it's there or not. We're doing our best, but this is why equivalent systems to ours have just not been found yet. And so the Kepler mission, one of the NASA missions that went and looked at 150,000 stars, was a complete change in what we could find because it just stared and recorded all the planets we could find, found over 2,500 planets, and most of these here are actually found by the Kepler mission. But what you see here too is we have the first candidates that are actually Earth size or smaller. Okay, I promise I only have 2 more of these weird diagrams and then we're going to go back to better pictures. But what I wanted to show you too is now if I have the wobble of the star, so I have an idea of the mass of the planet, okay? And I also see the blockage of light. Now I have the radius and the mass, and I said that gives me the density. Because yes, Jupiter is very different from the Earth, but how do I know if these planets in between are more like Jupiter or they are more like the Earth? I don't. What I need is a mean density. I need to know roughly what these objects are made of. And so here you have the radius versus mass. And so this shows you the distribution of density. And as a scientist, there are always error bars in all of these measurements, just so you are aware that everything we measure comes with error bars. This is Venus, this is the Earth. And so when I zoom into that region, again, mass and radius, if you have one Earth radius and one Earth mass, you are the Earth and you on this green line. And so if you have 10 Earth masses and you have about 2 Earth radii, you're still on the green line. And these dots are all the planets we found so far where we know mass and radius. We don't know that for all of them. But you can already see that we have planets that have a similar Earth-like density that we have identified out there. And so that is what becomes really interesting because now you have rocks, and some of these rocks are actually at the right distance to not be too hot or too cold. And another thing, so have a look at this line, at this 2 Earth radius line, okay? So what do you do if you only find the planet, only the radius of the planet? And so then you don't know if it's a rock or if it's not a rock. But if you look at this, you can basically look by eye from all the planets we know so far, everything that's below 2 Earth radius is actually a rock. So this last line here is 100% water, and we don't expect planets to be 100% water. There will be some rocky material in it. But above that line, you definitely need a lot of gas to make this work, okay? Above that line, you're mini Neptune. Oops, and I forgot my ring. Okay, so above that line, you're mini Neptune. But what it shows here is that if you say, I don't know the mass, but if my radius of the planet is below 2 Earth radii, all the planets I know of that are rocks that are below 2 Earth radii. So all of a sudden, you have now, from the pattern that the stars showed you, figured out how you can determine what the density roughly is just from one of the two methods. Because you have hundreds of stars, hundreds of planets with mass and radius, now you can deduce that all the planets below 2 Earth radii should be rocks. And so now we're in the ball game, because that means I don't have to also measure the mass, what's a long process, because if it's below 2 Earth radii, it should be a rock. So we have rocky planets, some of them at the right distance, not too hot, not too cold. What do you do next? Here, you have a look at our own solar system. And this is the Earth, of course, and these different objects. And you see that each of these have a different light fingerprint. What that means is that then if the light of the star hits the air or the atmosphere of that planet, it actually interacts with the molecules in that air. If you remember back in school, all the molecules have different shapes, right? So a water molecule, H2O, has two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom, right? And so it looks a little bit like a triangle. An oxygen molecule, two oxygen atoms, looks like a straight line. So light carries energy. You go out, you put your hand out, and it gets warm, right, in the sun. So if the light carries the right energy, hits the molecule, a molecule will start to swing and rotate. But you need a different energy to make a water molecule swing and rotate than to make an oxygen molecule swing and rotate. And so by the light that doesn't get to my telescope, by the light that's missing, I can tell you which molecule the light hit in the air of a world that is so far away from us that I actually can't fly there. And if you do this to our solar system planets, that's their light fingerprint. And you don't need to know the details, but they all look different because the air on these different worlds in our solar system is different. And so we can use this to try to figure out what is going on other worlds. So we're getting a new view of what rocky planets can be like, because remember, these are bigger than the ones we have. They are closer to the star than the ones we have in our solar system. And so if you have a rocky planet and you put it very close to a star is really hot, right? If you do that, you can actually start to melt the whole planet, because it's so hot that any rock we know melts. And you would have oceans on that planet made out of lava. That's what we call lava worlds. And we'll get back to how we characterize them. Then, if it gets a bit colder, you hit something like Venus, where you lost all the water because it evaporated. It gets even more cold, further away from the star, you get to Earth and liquid oceans. If you go even further, it gets so cold that everything starts to freeze out. So that's roughly how we can translate the distance from the star into what kind of planets we find. Because we know how bright the star is, we know where we find our planet, and so I can figure out if the planet that I found is in what I call this habitable zone, where you could have liquid water on the surface of the planet, plus minus 70% of what we get in terms of energy from our sun right now. Or if it's so hot that it lost its water, Venus, or even hotter and you have a lava world. So I can do that from the distance, but remember how I said how our sun is so big? 100 times the Earth next to each other is the diameter of the sun? We got lucky in that most of the stars out in our galaxy are actually not big stars like our sun. They are small red stars, about a tenth as big as our sun. And so here you have a great opportunity because the same size of a planet makes a much bigger signal, percentage-wise, right? It blocks much more percent of the surface of a smaller star. If you have this big of size of a planet and this big of a star, it's going to be really hard to find. But you have this size of a star and this size of a planet, it's much easier to find because it blocks about 5%, 10% instead of 0.5%, 0.1%, right? And luckily, 80% or 8 out of 10 stars are small red stars. So now we have ourselves a ball game where we can start to find these planets and identify them. And so when you collect light from these planets, and I said like some of them are so hot, and this is basically how hot their star is and how close they are to the star. We know a couple of those, and we have data of a couple of those already. But how do you know what they're made out of? They're made out of lava, right? And so you could say, okay, lava is definitely like the lava here on Earth. Well, how do you know that? You don't, right? Because these planets could be made out of more iron, less iron, kind of different stones. So if you're curious like me, I was like, oh, let's go and melt our own lava. And I went to our department head, and our department is like, no, you don't get to melt anything at 2000 degrees because you don't really know what you're doing. What he has a point. So I turned around and was like, haha, that's why I made the Carl Sagan Institute, where I have 15 different departments. So I went to my geophysics colleagues and was like, hey, can we melt our own planets? And they were like, yeah. I was like, okay, we're in business. And so we mixed our own lava composition. We said, okay, it could be more, could be less, less iron, and then we melted it. And it's really something I should definitely not do. Like, I have a person who knows how to do this, and that's really good because 2000 degrees and me and trying to actually melt this did not mix. We learned this really fast, and so I hired somebody who really knew what they were doing. But this is our experiment. So this is actually us melting material. And now, for the first time, we have a comparison chart. So now we get this data from the James Webb Space Telescope, and we say, oh, this looks like it's made out of basalt, or this one looks as if it's made out of granite, or this one looks like it's made out of nothing that we know anything of, but let me check my chart. It looks very much like this material that we haven't named yet, but so you need a comparison for these new worlds, and some of that turns out you have to do yourself. But let me get to the more interesting planets, the planets that are not too hot and not too cold. And this is an image that 3 of my undergrads just made because they just published, or are publishing, we just sent it back yesterday, a catalog about which planets are in what we call this habitable zone. So 100% is the energy that the Earth gets. And I said, about 70% more or less is where you are in this liquid water zone, this habitable zone. And so it turns out we have about 40 planets that we already know that are small enough to be a rock and also at the right distance that they could potentially have liquid water on the surface. Now, great. What do you do next? Remember when I told you about this light fingerprint, where light hits a molecule in the atmosphere and you can identify what the atmosphere is made of, even though you're not there, you just caught the light from that system? Well, this is NASA's animation of how we do this. So think about the planet going in front of the star and a little bit of the starlight getting filtered here through this thin atmosphere. Remember the peel of the apple? That's why we need this big James Webb telescope to just get enough photons to figure out if any are missing. That indicates what kind of molecules are in the air there. So we've done this before. We've done this with Hubble, but only for the big Jupiter planets, right? So we know how to do this. And so these are what it looks like. It's basically how much light gets through, and then is how energetic is this light. So we've done this for Hubble, and we're starting to do this for rocky worlds. Now, every time you see a wiggle here, okay, you can say, okay, so there is not enough light coming through, so that means there's a molecule. Then you go, you look up which molecule it is at this wavelength, at this energy of light. It's like, okay, I found water. Okay, I found sodium. Okay, I found potassium. These are big, hot Jupiter-like planets, no life, don't worry about it. But they also have water, just like water vapor in the atmosphere. So only because you found a gas that could potentially be linked to life doesn't mean there's life there. The context is key. You need a rocky planet that's temperate, and then it becomes interesting. So when you go to rocky worlds, we are doing this now with the James Webb Telescope because Hubble was about this big, and the James Webb Telescope is now 4 times me. Okay, so we can now do this for smaller planets. But as you see here, it is not that convincing yet. What's perfectly fine, it looks pretty flat. It's just because we don't have enough data yet to see these different structures and these different chemicals. But with more and more observation, we can actually start to find these structures. And so, if we go back to these really interesting planets, this is what we really want to do. And of course, I would love to tell you that we picked all the 40, we told the James Webb Space Telescope, throw away these black holes, who cares about galaxy, why do I want to know why the universe was done? That is what we didn't do. We said, this is also a really cool science thing. And they said, okay, your black hole colleagues are going to do this, the galaxy colleagues are going to do this, the universe colleagues are going to do this, and there's a little bit of time for you too. What is great, this is how science works. But we share. So we had to pick. And the system we picked is this system. It's called the TRAPPIST-1 system. It has 7 Earth-sized planets, with 3 of them in this habitable zone where there could be liquid water. And this is where we spend most of our time on with the James Webb Space Telescope for rocky planets. We also do a lot for giant planets because with the James Webb Telescope, it being so big, with one transit of a big planet, you can see a lot of details. But for the small planets, we need time to add up the signals. And so, how do you identify a habitable world? Well, the signs of life are written in a planet's light. If you know how to read it, we just talked about it. So, when you look at the Earth, you also have to remember that this is how we look like currently. So you see there's like energy missing that indicates water. There's energy missing that indicates oxygen. But remember that the Earth actually changed. So about 2 billion years ago, oxygen just started to rise. You had a bigger methane signal. And about 3.5 billion years ago, when we know that life started on the Earth, there was no oxygen. My life might have started even earlier. But just think about a planet as an evolving system where life and geology can also interact. But to spot life on a planet, to see this life fingerprint, only because life is there doesn't mean that you can actually find it. It needs to change the planet significantly that I can say, okay, this planet, I don't need life to explain all the signatures. A volcano eruption or other things could do it. But this planet, the combination of gases, I need life for it to work. So it's complex models that create this fingerprint. And so we were talking about these different kinds of planets that could be out there, bigger, smaller, hotter, colder, or maybe having completely different kind of biota. And now, how do we really do this? We do this the complicated way. You have light that hits the atmosphere, it changes the chemistry in the atmosphere, it gets reflected back from the surface of the atmosphere. But we do this for weather, right? And so we can also do this for a planet like the Earth. And I said, it's a 4.5 billion year old planet. So if you do it on a 24-hour clock, life is roughly started, or we're sure that it started about 5 a.m. Around lunchtime, you have oxygen photosynthesis, so the combination of oxygen and methane build up in the atmosphere. You can spot life. And in case you're wondering, second before midnight is when you and me and humankind actually started. So when we look for life out there, we don't necessarily just look for us. We are very open to any form of life, like even bacteria and slime mold or anything you want to give me. I'd be excited about, because if we find life once somewhere else, And it's so hard to do, and we are not very good to doing it yet because we don't have the biggest telescope yet. We're just starting to do it. If we find life once somewhere else, it must be abundant in the universe, because other than that, we couldn't find it. So even a slime mold, even a bacteria, I'm going to be super excited if you can find it. And this is what we're trying to do with the James Webb Space Telescope. And there's a big telescope coming up, the European Large Telescope, ELT, in Chile, about 40 meters. That's going to start working 2030 that we do this with. And remember I said before, remember when you would go back to the time of the dinosaurs, the Earth would be different? Turns out, and I work with a lot of geologists, turns out that actually during the time of the dinosaurs, we had the highest amount of oxygen in our air, about 30 to 35%. So it's easier to find signs of life on a planet during the time of the dinosaur than now. And so I'm not saying that they're space dinosaurs. But I'm saying, in case you're interested in trying to find space dinosaurs, those worlds would give us the strongest oxygen methane fingerprint, because during the time that the dinosaurs lived on the Earth, that's also the reason why we think they became so big, was that there was more oxygen available. So again, there's going to be a really, really interesting bias when we find signatures of life, of how which worlds we pick up first. And this is one of my other geology postdocs who also made a beautiful image for it, but it basically just shows you the oxygen concentration, the different ideas. But around 300 million years ago, the oxygen concentration was larger than now. And by the way, in case you're wondering, we do not know why we have 21% of oxygen. I can explain to you why we have it, because I know that our continents broke up and the oxygen was picked up and so on and so forth, but nobody can tell you what the amount of oxygen is you should have on a rocky planet, because we don't know why we have 21%. You can't have more than 35%, because then fires don't go out anymore. So it has to be below 35, but anything else is completely individual to the planet. And remember, I said the worlds could actually be different. It could have different colors. But the colors here actually are based on our search for different life forms. And I just took these two because I like the pictures. But on the right, for example, here you have a tardigrade or a water bear, and that kind of survives anything you throw at it. You can boil it, you can freeze it. They sent it into space on the outside of a rocket, brought it back, put some water on it, and tardigrade was like, okay, I'm fine. I made the terrible joke. So if you're ever in the situation, I once gave a talk to lots of astronauts. I was really, really impressed. I adored. I was like, my God, right? And then I was talking about the search for life, and like I was a bit nervous, and I was like, this is the best astronaut ever. You dehydrate it, send it to Mars, don't have to give it food, put a bit of water on it, and it's fine. No reaction from the audience. And then I said, well, but it's probably going to be really hard to make it drive a Mars rover, right? So I gained my audience back after that. But it's just interesting to think about the different kinds of life on the Earth and what different kind of environments it's in, because these other planets might have these environments, right? And so we don't want to miss signs of life if they're just not a carbon copy of the life we think about right now, the green plants, the animals, you and me. And so we have another lab, so we don't just melt our own worlds. I also said, how would a thermophile look like, right? So this is me in New Zealand, and I saw these different hot vents, and so this is life. This is life that is happy in a very hot sulfur environment. But other planets could have those environments, right? And so we don't want to miss signs of life. And so what we did is we created what we call a color catalog of life. In the beginning, we borrowed, bagged, and stealed. We didn't steal anything, but we basically asked all our biology friends, like, do you have any colorful life that you could send us? And we will measure it to see how it would look like on a different planet. And then we got a little bit of funding for it. So now we're doing it a little bit more specific to make a database of a wide variety of life, from icy places, from thermal vents, and so on and so forth, to not miss signs of life if they're out there. How would this look like? Well, this is one of the cover of the magazines we got, but we're saying, what about if you have an iced overworld? We already know life that can thrive in ice. And so if you have life that can thrive in ice, it has a certain pigment. And so we measured it. And this is also where it's, again, this interdisciplinarity comes in, because this is super important for people who study how ice melts, how glaciers melt. Because glaciers and ice have high reflectivity, so when the sun shines on it, they don't warm up very much. But once the bacteria take hold and actually populate this glacier, the glacier is less reflective, and basically it starts to melt from the top down. So we making these measurements, and then scientists can go to the Carl Sagan website and just use whatever they want to do with our data. We look for it in terms of we don't want to miss signs of life on other planets, but there's a lot of other things people can do. And remember I said 8 out of 10 stars are actually not yellow suns like ours, but luckily smaller red stars? Well, think about it this way. If I take my basil plant and I put it under a red star's light, it will definitely die. Might die anyway, but it will definitely die under red light because it evolved for yellow light. And so we looked on life on the Earth, and there's actually life that thrives under red light, even on the Earth, because it is in mats, right? And so the yellow light is gone because the top part of the mat has used the yellow light, and so some red light filters through. And so there's biota that it can actually live and thrive under red light. And it's called purple bacteria. So we used that, we measured it, and we tried to make sure the astronomers got the message. So we called it, in the search for life, purple might be the new green. Because 8 out of 10 stars are red stars, and purple bacteria can thrive and survive. And those biopigments that you find in this photosynthesis bacteria here on the Earth evolved for yellow light. This is why it's green. But on other planets, that doesn't have to be the case. And so we have to make sure not to bias our ideas when we search for life. And then do we use artificial intelligence? Oh, yes, I use anything that helps me. And artificial intelligence is really good for pattern recognition. So you use it for pattern recognition, for surfaces and other things. And so follow the water, that's the NASA slogan. Like AI is really good in finding reflectivity and patterns in the data. So water, clouds, ice, or even biota. And then, of course, I haven't even talked about how a planet could be very different if the interior is different, if it's made out of other materials. Remember when I talked about the lava worlds and that this could be a completely different composition of rocks? So there's a lot of work that still goes into this, and we have only scratched the surface. But whatever the planet's interior is like, it will influence what gases go out into the air. Those gases I can see in my telescope. And also what kind of surface I see, what kind of color of the surface I see. And as I said, I built the Carl Sagan Institute because I'm not allowed to burn down the astronomy department, apparently. Even so, I thought as a tenured professor, you had some privileges, but apparently not. And so these are my colleagues in the Carl Sagan Institute, and these are some of the young researchers that work with us. I couldn't fit everybody on. We have about 40 professors and senior researchers and their teams who help me with this for 15 different departments. And in case you're interested, Carl Sagan Institute, cornell.edu, or also online. We basically all work together to figure out how we can find life in the cosmos. This is my team. Most of them are undergrads here, and please note that I have very motivated undergrads because I happen to be an Austrian, so there's always good food, cookies, coffee, and I get to have more and more people. So at one point, I think we need to find a bigger room. But they're all really motivated and doing great things, and a lot of them are undergrads. So if you're an undergrad in the room and you're interested in research, just reach out to one of your professors. Ask if you can help. Ask if there's anything you can do. Why not? The worst thing they can say is no, right? And you're at the same point as you are right now. And so I have a lot of undergrads in my team. And as I said, this is Abby, this is Gillis, and Lucas is not here, but they just published their first paper on which are the planets that could potentially be other Earth. And they basically figured it out on their own, like, with a little bit of help. But they were the first ones to know because they did the analysis and they did the paper, and now it's out. Last point, and then I promise I'll answer any question you have. Now, if we are looking for life out there, where would be the places in the universe, I was wondering, that could see the Earth go in front of the sun? So, in a way, if you want to ask the question, where are we, the aliens? And it turns out you can calculate it. It's just geometry, right? So, there's a stripe of stars in the sky that would see the Earth go in front of the sun. And if they just had our level of technology, they could figure out that there's life on the Earth since about 2 billion years. So, in case you're worried that aliens will come and eat us, they had 2 billion years of time to figure this out. So, I'm cautiously optimistic that nobody's going to come and eat us. But there's this stripe in the sky that basically can see the Earth as an exoplanet. And so we have thousands of other worlds out there. And for the first time ever, we have this opportunity to figure out if there are other ones out there. And I think that is super exciting. However, let me also put one other thing in here. Whether there's life in the universe or not is a huge question. But in this search, in this looking at other rocky planets, one of the key things we do is to understand how a rocky planet like the Earth works, how it evolves, what are the fundamental processes that actually shape such a planet. If you just imagine we would find 50 or 100 Earths out there, they are older than us, Earth-like planets, then we could see a glimpse in a potential future of our own planets. And when my students ask, I usually say, well, if, and this is a big if, and this is hypothesis, we don't know any of this, but if all the older Earths we see would have like a lot of SO2 in their atmospheres, comes out of volcano eruptions, we can't breathe it. It's toxic for us. That doesn't mean that that has to happen to the Earth, but it means that it would be really smart to develop a technology that could filter out SO2 off the atmosphere just in case it happens to every older Earth. And so understanding our planet is one of the fundamental issues why we do this. So we live in a golden era of exploration. For the first time, we have an instrument that can look at the first of these planets that could potentially be like ours. We have 6,000 planets out there. And remember the distribution I showed you, how many of them are actually small, how many are big? From the ones we find, and from knowing how hard it is to find the small ones, I can figure out how many small ones must exist for me to have found about 40 already with the technology and the instruments I have. And you find that 1 out of 5 stars has to have a planet that could be Earth-like for us to have found 40 so far. 1 out of 5. Remember this image of our Milky Way galaxy that I showed you starting out? This 100,000 light years across? Our Milky Way galaxy has 200 billion stars. I gave you 1 out of 5. Thus, billions and billions of possibilities that we're now starting to be able to search for the first time. Thank you very much.
Professor Kaltenegger, thank you very much for this inspiring and mind-boggling talk. I will surely look at the sky different in the future. Maybe you can relate to this. There's colleagues on both sides and we are open for your questions. I heard you answer everything that will come
I'll
your way.
try.
Who's the first one to break the ice? I see one up there.
Wobble thing, right? Do you think that a planetary system where you have multiple planets has a more wobbly effect? And it would be interesting to maybe look at these planetary systems where you see Jupiter, where you could see the shade, and then look for small things that you might have missed with the old telescopes, but now you could start seeing maybe with the new ones and maybe focus on them.
Absolutely, and that's a really good point. And thank you for bringing it up, because I only showed you the multiple systems for the transits. But because each planet, due to Kepler's law, so the time that a planet takes to go around a star is linked to its distance. And there's no two planets that actually are the same orbit, because they would crash and form a bigger one. So this wobble, what we do is, like with the transits, we first look at the biggest wobble. Then we take that signal out. And then we see if there's another wobble at a different periodicity. And so if you looked at our solar system, first you would see the 11-year wobble due to Jupiter, because it's the most massive planets. But then we would take that out, and then you could find the other giant planets. And then in the end, you would find the 1-year wobble that's tiny for the Earth. And remember I showed you all the error bars on the data I showed you? So what we're working on right now is to beat down those error bars, because a lot of these observations are made from the ground where the air between us and the star distorts our data. And so with the really big telescopes like the ELT, we will be able to find even smaller signals and even smaller planets in the systems that where we already found planets. And maybe another thing to also say is that basically most systems have more than one planet, what is really exciting. So planets, if you want to know, are usually not lonely.
We have time for many more questions. I see one there, and then 2 rows in front of it.
What about life on moons? So you talked about like planets, but what about moons?
Great question. Simple answer. It is so hard to find signature on planets that are much bigger than their moons. Because if you would try to find it on a moon, you would have to block out the light, or, you have the light of the star, you have the light of the planet, and then you have the light of the moon. So it's a much, much smaller signature. But what could work, and by chance I wrote a paper on this like 15 years ago, I was thinking, how could we do this? And so if you think about the planet and the moon, the problem is that the moon and the planet the moon goes around each other, the planet, they go around the center of mass, but they also go around the star. So if by chance you could actually discover it in the alignment, this is the moon and this is the planet, where the planet transits the star, and then the transit of the planet stopped, and then you see the transit of the moon, that is the one time where you could actually see the atmosphere. But planets, by definition, moons are usually much smaller than planets. They don't have to be. In our solar system, we have a moon that is bigger than Mercury, but moons are smaller, and so the signal is smaller. And so we have this big problem that, glass half empty, glass half full. I gave you billions and billions of possibilities for planets. If I give you moons, I give you billions and billions and billions. I don't know. So the problem is only if the moon is not massive enough, like Sync Europa, Sync Enceladus in our solar system, then it won't be able to hold on to an atmosphere, most likely. And so if there's no atmosphere that I can probe in this transit geometry, my life got a lot harder trying to find signatures on the surface or below the surface. And so when you do exoplanets, stars that are very far away, where we cannot fly there, I can only find life or biosphere that has changed my surface or the atmosphere significantly. And if you think about an icy moon like Europa, huge ice layer below an ocean that might or might not have life, we need to go there. And really what we need to do is to drill through to sample the water to figure out if there's life. That's what you can do in our solar system. But this is how life hides from our view if it's in such a configuration on a planet or a moon around another star, because we don't have the opportunity to go and drill through and find subsurface life. So going back to saying, if we just find one other kind of life, it must be everywhere, because there's lots of life that we won't see. A, because it hasn't left unique signatures in the air or on the surface yet, like the first 1.5 billion years on the Earth's lifetime, or because life is subsurface and I can spot it remotely. And so if we find life, that is going to be a huge yes to how often it happens. But the good thing is we also have 1 out of 5 stars with a planet that could be potential like ours. So the odds might be in our favor. But with the James Webb Space Telescope, we can only do a certain area around us to catch enough light. So if only 1 out of 1,000 planets has life that changed its surface and air significantly, then it's probably going to have to be the next generation of telescopes. But we don't know that yet. So cautiously optimistic until proven otherwise.
Was one question 2 fronts, 2 rows in front of the previous one? No, this has been answered, it seems. So there's one in the first row.
Easy question. What will quantum computing support your research more for the next maybe 5 years, probably?
Right. So I think the key point is currently the advantages that we have by using machine learning and pattern recognition is one of the highlights we're working on right now. Quantum computing, once it actually works, right? So it's a super fascinating technology, but currently is not developed yet to the point where it can actually help me. I think once it is, then you can envision this to actually speed up all our model and our retrieval considerably. And it will open the opportunity to actually model a much, much wider range of atmospheres and planets. Because when I told you about the different things, you know, the interior, the outgassing, the flux from the star, and the life on that planet, I have to make cuts right now because I don't have infinite computer power. So I'm making educated choices of which ones I want to focus on. And the way I do it is I use a huge parameter space and sample it to see where there's actually signatures that change, because this is what I can remotely detect. And if there's a sample parameter space where, yes, it's different, but it is no remote detectable difference, then I leave that parameter space alone. With quantum computing, once it works, you could imagine that the speed of how you do the modeling would go up considerable, and the speed of how you actually find things. And so I just hope that it's going to be much, much faster once we have it. But still has to work first. But it's a great, great technology. It's just not practical right now.
I see Georgo sitting here and he's working on it with other faculty members, so
Okay,
be patient.
work a bit harder. No, it's all good. No pressure.
More questions. I see one very central. So this is a logistical challenge that we will solve with collaboration. Fantastic.
Well, thank you very much for this really excellent talk. Yeah. I have one question. There was a recent announcement on the exoplanet K2 18b that a sign of life with the dimethyl sulfide was detected. And I'm totally interested in your opinion on this detection, because there's some controversial discussion now on this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing this up, because I didn't automatically put it in the slide. But this is the signal that he was talking about. And so one of my colleagues has found an intriguing / interesting signal that you could contribute to what we call dimetal sulfur, DMS, and they published it. Absolutely, as you should as a scientist. However, the devil is in the detail. So remember, I was saying that there is these wiggly lines, and this could be different kind of chemicals, and this is what they used for the press release, and so this is a line that could indicate dimetal sulfur. And you see already that honestly, if you squint your eyes, you could put a straight line through this as well, right? Kind of, because the error bars are these lines. So hope is part of the story here, that they hoped that this might be a signal. Okay, now, is it really a signal? The big problem you have is when you do retrieval, you do statistics. It's Bayesian statistics retrieval. Basically, you tell the computer what chemicals could be in the air of that planet, and then it tries to fit and says, okay, this chemical is more likely than this chemical. Think about it this way. If I ask a computer, okay, is the moon made out of cheese or is there no moon? The computer will tell you the likely answer is the moon is made out of cheese. It's more likely than there's no moon, right? And so the way that this worked is that the scientist made a very restricted choice on what chemicals could be in the air because they really hoped for it to be this. I think would be a way to phrase it. You have to be very careful not to get sued. But basically, it was like, is the moon made out of cheese? And the answer was, it's more likely that the moon made out of cheese than if there's no moon, right? So it's more likely that there's dimetal sulfur than there's nothing, is basically the answer that the computer gave. Okay, luckily, this data became public. So other people used it. And so now if you use a lot of gases that could be in this planet, you actually see that other gases fit this way, way better than dimetal sulfur. Unfortunately, because I would wish this to be science for life, right? And we'll talk about if dimetal sulfur is actually a sign of life in the first place. But so the signal and the way that they treated the data was not the most optimum to figure out what was really in the atmosphere of that planet, let's say it that way. And so there's actually a better fit. For example, propane, C3H4, fits way better than DMS. It's not really saying anything about life, right? So unfortunately, but this is scientific progress, right? Data is available, other teams look at it and come up with a solid answer. And the problem with this press release was really that even if it would have been DMS, right? We have found, so, and the story was that DMS gets produced when algae does photosynthesis on the Earth. That's absolutely true. However, we already found DMS on a comet, where it's not a sign of life. We found it in the interstellar medium, so the stuff between the stars, where it's not a sign of life. And we know that you can make it artificially. We know that. But my esteemed colleagues decided to not mention that in their excitement about this could potentially mean that they have found life in the universe and will forever be remembered in history for this feast. So I wish it was true. The problem is that the data does not support the conclusion they made. And even if the data supported the conclusion they made, we know of ways that are non-biological to do this. And so we have a way to do this that I would say 85% of the scientific community actually agrees to. First, you have to find a solid signal. Then you have to figure out if in context, it actually is a sign of life. Remember I said, you want to be in this habitable zone where it's not too hot and not too cold. And then it's oxygen with a reducing gas. Because if it's hotter, you can actually split water. And so you can get a lot of oxygen just by splitting water. If you have a lot of CO2, you can get a lot of oxygen by splitting CO2. So you need to know, or you have to be able to exclude other sources. And just fun fact, in case you want to have a fun fact about this, is actually, so the idea is that there might be an ocean, under a thick atmosphere, and the thick atmosphere prevents us from actually seeing that ocean, right? So we don't know if there's an ocean or not. And now this DMS that was invoked is done by photosynthetic bacteria. They need light. We don't see the surface because no light gets all the way to the surface. So even if it is DMS, and even if you want to invoke algae, the big question is, where do you get the light from? So unfortunately, I wish my presentation were different and I could say we found life in the universe, but unfortunately, we have not. Even so, some people are very enthusiastic about hoping it would be otherwise. And I get that. I would also love to be the person who found life in the universe. I just basically put myself every day when I walk out of the office, I'm like, but can you confirm, is this really a signal? This is where the scientific method gets you every time, because I wish that some signals were more than they are too.
We would have time for one or two more questions. I see one here.
I'll be short in
one
answering.
there.
Sorry.
So maybe.
Gentleman over there.
Yes.
Yes.
Go.
Thank you. When talking about life, we normally mean carbon-based life, using water basically as a solvent, as a main solvent. Is it thinkable that there is forms of life not based on carbon?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question too. So I haven't talked about this at all. So there are two aspects, right? First, if I tell you that I found signs of life, you might want me to be sure. And if I can make that life in the lab and see what gases it produces, right, I won't be able to say anything but, ooh, this is strange, right? This could be life or it could not be life. But if we look at the chemistry, you need something that can make long carbon or long strands, right? It doesn't have to be carbon. So you look basically in the periodic table and say, what else would be able to do this? It turns out that carbon's advantage is not just that you can make this complicated strands, but also that it's energetically really easy to break it. And if you have water on that planet too, then CO2, so if the carbon actually reacts with oxygen, you have CO2, that's a gas that can actually get dissolved in water and it's easy to break. If you take some of the other contenders like silicon, the problem SiO2, you need to go to 2000 degrees to break it apart again. So the energetic cost of trying things out, of trial and error, is not in your favor. While in carbon, you make it, you break it, you make it, you break it, you make it, you break it, energetically very cheaply. And so we think this is one of the reasons why carbon is probably the backbone, and also it's very widely distributed in the universe. Because the interesting thing is there's actually more silicate on the Earth than there is carbon, and life didn't use it. So it's just one example. But the solvent is going to be a really interesting question, because once the planet goes further away from the star, it gets colder and water will turn to ice. So on Titan, this moon around Saturn, there's actually oceans on the surface. They are oceans made of ethane and methane. And there the question is, like, Saturn is further away, so not much heat from the sun gets there anymore. So water is solidified, but methane and ethane have a lower freezing point. And so the question is, could you have life in a different solvent? And it's a really, really interesting question. Problem is, we can't make life in the lab, so we can't change your solvent and actually check if it works. We can't even make carbon water life in the lab, and I usually push my biology colleagues to get started on that, and they have gotten started on it. It's just really, really hard to do. One big question that comes up if you go to cooler temperatures, our understanding is that life started with trials and errors. So the chemistry that then makes life has to go and try different paths. And if you make something cold, the reactions slow down. And then the question is if 4.5 billion years, the lifetime of our solar system, is enough. to have started this millions of connotations that by chance started to make it cell, started to make a kind of proto-cell that they could concentrate the chemistry inside, and that concentration of the chemistry inside then would lead to these long chains that you can form. And I just had the exact conversation with Jack Szostak. He's one of the Nobel Prize winners who's working on the origins of life. And we just said Monday. Monday we sat in my office and we're like, so, and he was like, wow, yeah, but the reaction rates. And there's also some really interesting research going on right now that shows that you need a certain amount of UV light to actually speed up this reaction rates. That's out of Cambridge by Paul Rimmer. And if that's true, then again, you want to be closer to your star so that you have some UV light that can actually speed up these reactions that make chemistry to biology. But because we're not there yet, we really don't know exactly what it is. And so when we talked about it, we made a very bad joke by saying this is such a terrible PhD project, making life, because you want to do it within 3 to 5 years if you're PhD students and have a couple of papers, right? But you don't know how long to wait, because if you have this solution, right, and you're trying to make life, and it's like, when do you change the dial to a different temperature? Because we were basically looking to ourselves like, what about if you changed and if you had waited 5 more minutes, it would have started, right? There's no way to know if it's going to be 10,000 years, 100,000 years, or tomorrow that they figure out how to make chemistry into non-chemistry only. But super interesting. So we're keeping our eyes out for things that we know how to find, and for weird things, of course, too.
Then to the final question.
And I said I would be shorter. Sorry, I'll be shorter in answering. There's so many great questions and so many cool things to think about.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. So let's be optimistic. 10, 20, even 30 years, we have definitive spectroscopic evidence, even see evidence for global warming in the system from burning of fossil fuels or something. What do you think, as a scientific community and funding agencies, what should we take as the next step if we get there?
So if we find an interesting system, the next thing we want to do is we want to have more information, right? Because right now we have this time that we have to spend on all these candidates because we don't know which one is actually going to be a good candidate. Once you have one, you can envision having a telescope that only looks at that world. And so you add up the data and you add up and you get more and more details. And then, the question is, if you see global, climate change also on these worlds, plus and minus, at least we are not alone in what we're doing, right? The minus is like, hopefully they're not going to annihilate themselves either. But what a friend of mine is saying is like, if we just found another civilization out there, right? And he's like, this is very philosophical, but he was like, and especially if it were more advanced, then we know that it's doable. Then we know that you can survive this technological age that we find ourselves in. And another personal hope I have on this is if we found some signs for life somewhere, I think a lot of really bright minds will come together to try to figure out what to do next. If we could send a message, if we could send a probe, we don't have to send anything. We all have to agree to do it, right? But just the idea that this is all of a sudden a possibility, I think changes science. And one example is that there is a breakthrough star initiative at the US, and by no means they're doing it the exact right way, right, in terms of technology and stuff. But they basically said, okay, let's try to figure out how we get to the next star. Like 5-7 years ago. And before that, I remember people would laugh at you if you say, oh, I'm trying to get like a star drive to go to the next star. And all of a sudden, they had funding and they were basically giving grants out. It became an engineering problem. And as soon as it became an engineering problem, it started to become actionable. What do you need to know? What do you have to find? What is the problem? What about light speed, like a percentage of light speed? What would this do to materials? And so I think finding a planet where we find signs that we cannot explain by anything other than life would spur this whole idea, inspiration of space travel completely different than what we have right now. Because while we hope that there might be life on Mars and maybe Europa and Enceladus, we really don't think it would be anything we can communicate with. And so the inspiration you get from seeing something with oxygen and methane, maybe, 30% dinosaurs on other planets, and now you can go. Give me a 5-year-old. All of them will go to engineering school to find the first dinosaur on another planet, right? This is why we sneakily put the dinosaurs in this story. Because I figured if I can get all the kids who like stars and all the kids who like dinosaurs, the STEM problem is solved.
Thank you very much for this wonderful conclusion and also for all your wonderful questions. If you want to cultivate this curiosity even further, then please follow the channels and the newsletters from both ISTA and also the Austrian Academy of Sciences, ÖAW. You can also book tours for the Vista Science Experience Center, this wonderful glass pavilion that opened a few weeks ago, and you have research exhibitions there and workshops. So vistascience.at, you can find all information. And also, you can save the date of December 10th, where we have the next issue of the ISTA Lecture Series with speaker Cynthia Dwork, a professor for computer science at Harvard University. This is all in the future. If you can't wait that long, we have something right here and right now. Outside, Professor Lisa Kaltenegger will sign books so you can buy your next dose of curiosity, Alien Earths. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk, and see you outside with further discussion. Thank you.